always talk about the stories of Moses and Abraham and David and Paul. We know all about the boys. But what about the girls? Why don't we talk more about the people in the Bible who are like me? When I read the Bible, I see story after story of women who are amazing. I see the courage and hope of Miriam and the boldness of Mary Magdalene. I see the consistent and quiet obedience of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Ruth and Naomi teach us of love, loyalty, and perseverance. Esther becomes a queen who uses her power to save her people. And Deborah becomes a judge and general who defeats the oppressors of her nation. It turns out the girls of the Bible are pretty awesome. And when we take the time to learn their stories, we will be amazed at what God can do with someone who is consistently, humbly, and lovingly faithful.
Nice. All right. Good morning, everyone in the room. Good morning, everyone online. My name is Kyle, and I am the student pastor here. And as you can probably tell, I am not Nate, who is our head pastor. For any of you guys who are new, who are like, I don't know who Kyle or Nate are, I'm just a student pastor. And I'm thrilled to announce that the reason that I am on stage preaching this morning is because Nate and his wife, Jen, have just welcomed their new son, John, into the world. And so, let's get some cheers going for that. I mean, absolutely incredible blessing. I'm not exactly sure of the birthday, but I know I got a text with a picture on Friday, so we're going to go with the 30th, and just, if I'm wrong, then we will correct it next week. But just such an incredible blessing. It has been such a celebration on our staff group text, just of celebrating Nate. And on Facebook, you'd think Nate's about to go like Facebook famous with how many people have commented and liked the pictures of his son. And it has been awesome. And honestly, too, guys, just to be aware of it for a second, it doesn't, or I guess to put it differently than that, it's not lost on me the fact that the last time that I was asked by Nate to step in and preach for him was when he had to take a little bit of time off because he and Jen were basically spending their last few days with Jen's dad, John, and dealing with that loss of a father and of a grandfather far too early. And how beautiful and how incredible is it that this morning, that the next time that I was asked by Nate to step in and preach so he could take a little bit of time off to be with family, that it is because they are celebrating the new life and the birth of their son, John. And so real quick, I just wanted to take a second and just pray for them real quick and just thank God for his blessings. God, thank you for bringing us here this morning, God. Thank you just so much for Nate and for Jen and what they mean to our hearts and what they mean to our church and to all of us here this morning. God, I just pray that you are just showering them with joy right now as they have welcomed in John, this beautiful baby boy. And God, we just pray that in the midst of probably a lot of sleeplessness and a lot of unrest, God, that they find places where they can rest, even if it's not physically, where they can just rest in you and in your blessings and in your joy. Amen. So anyways, with that being said, here I am this morning getting to go through another incredible woman's story within the Bible. And I love the ability to do that. And this morning, we're going to go into the book of Ruth. And one of the things that I think is incredible about Ruth and is noteworthy about the book of Ruth is that you could make a you could make a series that is called Faithful about the book of Ruth. When you go through Ruth and you see the way that these people live their lives, see the unbelievable ways that Ruth steps out in faith, looking at fear, looking at terror, looking at loneliness, looking at loss, and at every moment choosing to turn to faith. And this morning and next week, we get to spend 2 weeks talking about the faithfulness of one of the most faithful women and one of the most faithful people in all of the Bible. before we get going, I do want to mention that in my just imminent and unbelievably high amounts of wisdom, as I thought about the fact that, at some point I'm going to preach this series, these 2 weeks in Ruth, and John's due date is May 17th, and so that's a few weeks away. And so in my wisdom, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? Because I know how babies work, and I know that sometimes people have babies early. I'm going to start on May 3rd to just get ready. I'm going to be fully ready. That way, if John comes early, Mother's Day, I'm all in. I got it. I'm ready to go. Well, here we were on Friday when I got a text with a baby's picture, and I'm like, this is Nate messing with me. Turns out it wasn't. It was John in the flesh, and so I say that not to give any excuses or not in any way to say anything except for the fact that this sermon might be a little bit less dialed in. It might be a little bit less polished than sermons you're used to. I know that anybody who's heard me preach before is probably laughing at the fact that I would use polished in my sermons in the same sentence. But I do say that to say that this story, as we read through Ruth 1 together and we talk through Ruth 1 together, that regardless of how well or how poorly I speak or how polished this sermon is this morning, the truth that is found in Ruth 1 should speak for itself. And so I ask for grace, and I also ask for the fact that even if I am spitting absolute nonsense, that at least this story you will let resonate in your hearts and hopefully walk away learning something by simply hearing this passage of Scripture. And so this morning, I wanted to start off by telling you guys the backstory of actually how I ended up making my way to grace. It's a story that I don't really think I've told that many people. I mean, not for any reason. I'm not hiding it or whatever, but, I figured it'd be something that would be worth talking about. And it's a story that I love because when I think back on it, it's just pretty wild that it worked out this way because as a lot of you know, I was working as a student pastor in Atlanta at a church called Greystone, and I was actually working underneath Nate, who was also at Greystone. He wasn't the head pastor, but it was a bigger staff, and so there were levels to the staff, and so I was actually directly under Nate. Well, we left Greystone at about the same time. He came up here, obviously, to enter into becoming a head pastor. Woo, exciting. That's us, yay. But I left to kind of go into school and to do some seminary stuff. Well, after about a year of doing that, I realized that as someone who was so used to being in full-time student ministry, that when I'm sitting in classes listening to ministry and talking about student ministry, I realized how bored I was and how little I enjoyed learning about these things and talking about these things when I wasn't able to be a part of them. Ministry was great, and talking about ministry is great, but doing ministry and actually having interaction and actually having students that are in my life that I love and that I get to be in their lives, when I was missing out on that, I was just like, dude, I don't even know if this is worth it. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to try to get back into the church. We'll figure out what exactly it looks like and with school and all this stuff, but I'm going to try to get back into the church. So I tried to explore some avenues. I found that some churches were doing stuff. Nothing really worked out. Well, at about the same time, I texted Nate. I said, yo, you're a head pastor, and head pastors know things. So if you hear of anything, I'm trying to get back into the game, baby. Basically is what I said. And at the same time, my dad's first pastor that he was a student pastor under reached out to me. He was the head pastor at this Baptist church that was right outside of Athens, Georgia. Now, Athens, Georgia is where I lived. I went to UGA, go Dogs. Yep, we all agree. Tons of people are nodding in the building. I know you're all nodding at home for the Go Dogs. But I was living in Athens at the time. My brother and sister-in-law lived in Athens. I was hanging out with them most every day. A lot of my friends still lived in Athens. My parents, even though they were in South Carolina, only lived about an hour and a half, 2 hours away. Everybody was in Georgia. Everybody was very near Athens or Atlanta or somewhere around there. And so when someone calls and says, hey, we have a job available doing student ministry where you don't have to leave this place you love and you don't have to leave these people you love, well, then you listen. especially when it's a pastor who you know and who you already know. This is a man that I would love to work for because I know that my dad loved working for him. And so as I'm talking with Nate, because Nate texted back and said, well, it's funny, we actually are looking for someone as well. And so I'm kind of, at the same time, I'm interviewing in Georgia, I'm interviewing here, and obviously it progressed a little bit quicker in Georgia because I could just get out to the church. And so, I was able to go check out the church. It was this beautiful Baptist church, one of those Baptist churches that, is kind of just in the middle of town where it's just like, oh my gosh, this is just like beautiful and awesome, and there's so many people who come in from everywhere, and it sounds like they have like a big thriving student ministry, and all of these things are awesome. And I got to go to a service. I was like, oh, this is cool, this is really nice, this is great, all of these things. And so I actually got a call the night before I was coming up to Raleigh to do some of those same things, and the call was to say, hey, Kyle, we want to hire you as our student pastor. They gave me an offer, and it was a good offer for, I guess, like monetarily, as far as like being a student pastor. So that was cool and that was great. Well, so that was what I was sitting on when I drive up to Raleigh for the weekend. And so as I drive up to Raleigh, the first thing that happens is I meet with Nate, and I'm thinking that Nate and I are just going to be gabbing about, what's been going on, all this type of stuff. And, because I'm like, well, I know I got Nate on my side. I've already worked with Nate. And then we have this conversation where I go, oh my gosh, I don't know if Nate wants me to work here. And all he was doing was he was grilling me, and he was saying, here are these things that I've seen in you in the past. How have you been able to make strides? Or are these still things that you would consider strengths? All of those things. But right off the bat, I was pretty overwhelmed. But I spent the weekend talking to different people and interviewing and getting to meet staff, and came on a Sunday morning. And as I drive up, I'm like, oh, yes, this church is in the side of a storefront. Interesting. That's cool. I like the white letters, though. But so I'm like, okay, interesting. And so I come in, and obviously, we have done an incredible job with this space, but obviously, it doesn't really rival a beautiful Baptist church's sanctuary, And so we're going through these things, and we go through service, and then I come on a Sunday night, and I get to meet some of the students. And as much as I loved meeting these students, I'm kind of hearing about that while there are certainly just some incredible students in this ministry, that there have been a lot of people who've left it. And because of that, it maybe wasn't at quite the healthiest state. And so as I left, I received a job offer from Grace as well. For less money, obviously. This is a smaller church. It was a smaller youth ministry. No, in no way was I expecting it to be more, because I was kind of like, hey, I don't think you understand that I'm young and single and a student pastor. You shouldn't be paying me this much money. That type of thing in the other place. But as I left, I sat there, and I'm like, hey, if I made a pro-con list, it's going to be an interesting look. And I was going to bring out a whiteboard and actually make a pro-con list, but I don't know how many of you guys were here the last time we used a whiteboard on stage, but Zach Winston and I, getting it off the stage, almost knocked the TV down and broke a wine glass that was on the table for communion. So we're not going to do that this morning. So just imagine with me a pro-con list being on a whiteboard here. But when you look at it, it's like, coming to Grace means leaving my family. It means that instead of the max distance that I am from my close personal family as being about 2 hours, to the closest that I am to anybody, which was my parents at the time, it was 4.5 hours, and then 6 hours if I wanted to drive to Athens. And not to mention that, but also my friends and all of these things. And I'm choosing a smaller church that seems like the youth ministry might not be quite where the youth ministry was at this other place. And I'm choosing less money. And honestly, the definition of conless is having to work for Nate. So here's all of these things. And I say that to say, when you look at every single decision that I had to make, where I compared the two, and when I made a pro-con list of what it would look like to go to Grace versus go to this other church in Georgia, from every human perspective, there was literally only one decision, and it was screaming at my face saying, you've got to take this job in Georgia. But here I am. And so, yeah, woo! Thank you for the claps. That's nice and funny. But And I think that this first chapter of Ruth helps at least a little bit explain why it is that I'm here. To give a little background behind Ruth, basically what is going on in this time is they are living in Israel, God's chosen people in God's chosen land. You know, Moses had brought his people out of Egypt, and Joshua had brought those people into Israel so that they could settle, and they were living in God's promised land as God's chosen people. During this time, there weren't kings. That's important for next week, so remember the king thing. But for this week, there weren't kings, and so it's instead the time of judges. And so God has given his people his law. These are the laws and the commandments that I ask you to abide by, and the judges were to make sure that those were being were abiding. I don't know, whatever, not important. So because there weren't kings, because there was no earthly ruler, then God kind of reigned supreme in a way that we don't quite see as much now, where basically because these were his chosen people and the people who were called to live out his law and called to live out their lives in faith and to trust him and to worship him, when they were doing so, then times were good. Harvests were good. If they weren't, there might be times when armies come in and take over some of the land. There may be times of famine because people aren't living for God. It was just a different time, and it was how the culture was set up during the time of Judges. Well, we were in one of those times as we jump into our story. It starts out talking about this woman named Naomi, and Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, were dealing in a time of famine to the point that they realized, hey, like, this is rough. And instead of making the choice to say, I'm going to trust God to provide what he needs to provide for me and for my family, they instead decide they are going to leave. They're going to grab their 2 sons, and they are going to go into another kingdom. Well, this other kingdom, we'll call it not a friendly. We'll say Moab is like an enemy nation, an enemy country. They're continuously at war. During this time, I read somewhere, it's not actually within the pages of Ruth, but that during this time, there was no love lost between these 2 kingdoms to the point of like war and battle and all of these things. And so for them to leave Israel and go seek refuge in a kingdom that was not only not God's chosen place and God's chosen people, but an enemy of God, people who were so against God and his people that they wanted to kill them. And so this is where they went. They settled in, and Elimelech ends up dying. So Naomi loses her husband, and now all she has is her sons. Mahlon and Chilion, her sons, marry 2 Moabite women. They marry Ruth and they marry Orpah. They live there for 10 years, and in those 10 years, neither one of them is able to conceive. Neither one of them is able to produce a seed that could lead to them continuing their familial line. In this culture, that was about the most important reason to get married, was 1, to take care of take care of your family, but 2, to raise up a son and raise up a family who is able to take care of your crops, who is able to grow, who is able to take care of your land, who is able to continue your family line, and when your family or when your parents get older, to take care of them as well. So in these 10 years, there haven't been any children conceived, and her sons die. Both of them die before they're able to conceive. And so now what we're left with Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth together. And Naomi, in her overwhelming tragedy, finally realizes that she now has to look her shame in the face. She now has to look her fear and her bad decision in the face and say, I can't provide for myself here. There's nothing that I will be able to do here. I have to return home. She says, I know that the Lord would have me, she doesn't say this, but like essentially she says, I know the Lord would have me return home because I have to be able to survive. And so I'm going to have to look in the face of people who are probably going to look down on me and see me differently because I chose fear over faith 10 years ago. Coming back in her shame to say, you know what, God is asking me to be here, and so this is where I need to be because I need to survive and I need to be a part of where God has me, even if it means I'm going to be looked down upon. But on their way there, she looks at her daughters-in-law and she says, leave me. Don't be with me anymore. There's no reason for you to follow me back because if you follow me back, then I can assure you nothing good awaits you. They all weep and they plead with her like, no, we're going to stay with you. You need us. You need us for survival. There's no way you're going to be able to make it alone. But Naomi continues to press on and says, there's literally nothing there for you. You can't just marry some random man in Israel because you're a Moabite. They won't marry you. Also, I'm too old now to find a husband and much too old to find a husband where I can have another son and you can marry my next son so that you can continue the line and continue in this kinship. So don't go with me. Go back home. Go where your family is. Go where you're comfortable. Go where you know that you at least have some sort of hope at having a family and having a life because coming with me will be no life at all. At this, they all weep again. Clearly, there's so much love between these three women that is just beautiful. But after it, Orpah says, okay. So she gives her love to these two and she heads out. But Ruth says, no, I'm staying with you. She says, I don't care what you have to say with me. Stop pleading with me. I'm going to stay with you. And that's where we're actually going to pick up and we're actually going to read. It's in Ruth 1. And we're going to start in verse 16. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. That's where we're going to stop. How incredible is that? How unbelievable is it that Ruth would say, in the face of everything that Naomi is telling me, I'm going to stick with you, Naomi. Let's head back to the pro-con list. I want us to understand the implications of what she's saying. Because not only is she saying that by sticking with Naomi, that it probably means that she is going on towards loneliness and singleness, and that will be the end of her family line. Not only is she saying that, which is incredibly devastating, especially in this time, but I know that there's some that like in today's culture, especially some people are like, yes, queen, you don't need no man, but also take account that she is taking an elderly woman back. And her goal and her mission, and the only reason she's doing so, is so that she can be a caretaker for this elderly woman who's not even her mom, just a mother-in-law that she has grown to love. So the rest of her life is going to be meant for just finding food wherever she's able to scrounge up food for a single woman without any land. But not only that, but she is a Moabite woman who is entering into Israel where she is hated. So she is walking into a place where she knows she is going to receive bitter racism, and it's alluded to multiple times later in Ruth that she is entering into a place that actually could be quite harmful to her, that she could be hurt, injured, killed, or raped by any of these people because she is considered nothing as a single Moabite woman, as less than nothing by some of these people. What's waiting for her if she doesn't stay with Naomi? She gets to go back to her family. She gets to go back to her home. She gets to go back with the hope with the hope and encouragement that I can probably find another husband, that I can finally start a family even though I wasn't able to before. There is no good, satisfactory reason why she should stay with Naomi, except that, one, she was being nice to help Naomi out, but I think that what Ruth realized and what Ruth knew in her heart, the reason why it didn't matter how long the list of cons were for entering and how long the pros of going back to her kingdom were, I think she knew in her heart what Daniel knew and what what David wrote in Psalms 84:10 when he says, "Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere." I think what she realized and what she knew without a shadow of a doubt is that the Lord had her staying with Naomi. And that is the only thing that mattered. When I was trying to decide, honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, I wasn't ever really trying to decide. Every stop that I made, every interaction that I had, every single part of my weekend in Raleigh was the Lord yelling at me, "Kyle, this is where I have you." And I don't at all mean to, and please do not hear me at all, likening my experience coming to Raleigh with Ruth's experience of giving up her entire life to be a single caretaking woman who is ending her seed. Because I came here and I was overwhelmingly blessed, and I came here with immense hope at what was to come. She left without any hope except that if I am in the will of God, then I know there is always hope, because I know that there is no place better to be than inside the will of God than anywhere else. I know for me, I was incredibly thankful, because this would have been a very difficult decision for me had God not been literally screaming in my face, "This is where I have you." And I don't mean to say that I haven't experienced drawbacks and sadness at the times that I have to miss holidays or birthdays or weddings or the like because my friends and my family are all in Georgia. There are certainly negatives to being in Raleigh versus having taken that job in Georgia, but I promise you that every day I get to wake up knowing that because because the Lord made it literally impossible for me to choose anything else, but I got to be in the will of God, and it has been unbelievable, the blessings that have come from getting to see what it looks like to just choose the will of God. And the point of this morning isn't to look at each one of you guys and say, "Hey, time to leave your family, time to leave your homes, time to go to another state and work for another Nate." The purpose of this is not, it's time to give up everything that you hold dear so that you can follow God, or it's time to, give up your job or your career or your friends or whatever. Now, hear me saying, it's not that, because if the Lord is working in your life and asking you to do so, then that's a conversation to have, and that is a prayer that needs to be thrown out. But every single day, we are faced with decisions on whether we want to act in faith, whether we want to choose faith in this interaction that we have, in this way that we think about something, with the way that we spend our time, with the things that we value. We are having an interaction in our heads on whether or not we are going to choose faith or we are going to choose ourselves, fear, worry, comfort, all of those types of things, because it's a lot easier to make the decision that seems earthly like a good decision. But this morning, what I'm asking you, and honestly, what I'm telling you is, I am 100% sure that there is no better place to be than inside of the will of God. In big ways, but in small little decisions. When you're in your small group and it feels like it's uncomfortable for me to be honest and to be open and to be vulnerable with these people that are also my friends, and I don't know how they'll react to me, that you choose faith and you say, I know that this is best for me, and I know that these people, if they can walk beside me, knowing me in my full self, then I promise you I will have a better life and a better faith, and I will experience more joy. And so I am going to look that fear of how people will see me in the face and say no, because I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm going to be open in this small group and with these friends. Maybe you have coworkers or you have friends that you know need to hear who God is, but you're afraid of how they'll react to you, or you're afraid that they'll look at you different or see you different, or honestly, you're afraid of the discomfort of having to figure it out, or you're just afraid because it's just scary in general to do something like that. Maybe you have a sin that's eating your lunch or overwhelming you, and you're so afraid to open up about it. You're so afraid to fight it because you're so rested in it that it's like become the norm, and it's become your comfort, and it's become your reliance, and you're terrified of getting rid of it, and you're even more terrified of people finding out. But you know that as soon as you're able to open up and able to share this sin with somebody, that you can maybe for once and for all kick this sin because you have somebody being accountable to you for it. Maybe you need to change your priorities from the fact that obviously we live in a culture where success and our jobs and the money and all of these things are what we should be pursuing and what we should be valuing. But maybe we decide, you know what? I'm going to value God over all of that. And I'm going to make my decisions that I make for God and for His glory and out of where His will is for my life, and not simply what is best for my career and my life personally. I'll give the opposite of the student ones, and I'll just talk to the parents now because this is one we talk about in students a lot. But parents, maybe it means that you need to look culture in the face and say, you know what? I know that all these parents are going to look down on me, but I'm going to value my kids' spiritual life and their spiritual walk and their ability to come to church and to be a part of a church community. I'm going to value that more than I value their education and their athletic career and future. I'm going to value their future as someone who grows spiritually and is spiritually healthy and full, that also seeks after being inside of the will of God. There are very easy arguments to fight against all of these. There are probably good spiritual arguments to fight against any of these hard decisions where the Lord is asking you to step out in faith. That's why it's faith. Last week we sang, I'm no longer a slave to fear, but I'm a child of God. And I've thought before, is fear really that big of a thing now versus Bible times? Yes! If you aren't experiencing any fear or any worry when it comes to living out your faith, then my question for you is it because your faith is so strong in who God has called you to be, and so at every waking moment, every decision is for Him, or are you unwilling to step out in faith enough to where fear isn't even an impact or isn't even a factor? I often realize about myself that it's the latter. I don't lack fear because of my faith. I avoid fear at the expense of not doing anything that requires me stepping out in faith. May we not do that this morning. May we not do that this week. May we not do that in our lives. And may we instead just understand the joy and the goodness of God and allow that to bring about a freedom in our hearts to say yes to God at any and every turn, even if it makes literally no sense to us, even if it makes no sense to anybody else around us. Let's pray. God, thank you for bringing us here this morning. God, thank you for an unbelievably beautiful depiction of faith in the book of Ruth, God. Just in Ruth 1, we got 3 more chapters. Lord, I know that we're not always asked to give up our entire lives and everything about ourselves to follow you and to say yes to you. But God, what I also know is every single day we are faced with choices of whether we say yes to you and your will or we say yes to us and ours. God, may we have the freedom and the love and the joy and the goodness that we have experienced from you. May that shape our decisions in boldness to say yes to you every single time. God, we love you so much. Amen.